This is a Film Stories original podcast.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
The book, I think the book is very good. Woody's an interesting subject. But strangely, John, now you might disagree with me, but I don't have to like my subjects personally. And strangely, I don't.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema.
Everybody, and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to be joined by an old friend of the podcast, Patrick McGilligan. Thank you for joining me, Patrick.
Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be back.
Last time you were here, we were talking about biographies. And last time you were here, you also said a fatal suggestion that I write one of my own. Little did we know what ill you spread into the world.
Yes, I'm an infectious agent. Yeah.
But we're going to talk about your new biography, which is called Woody Allen, A Travesty of a Mockery of a Sham. And it's a brilliant book. It's a wonderful read. And also, I have to say straight off the bat, it's a courageous book because this is a topic that most people would kind of flee from. Why did you write this book? I guess is the simplest way of putting it.
Yeah, well, I probably should have fled from it. The honest answer is always that someone gave me a contract. But in this case, it was my editor of the Mel Brooks book who was talking to me, having a long conversation with me about other possible topics. And it was a very fractious conversation because he wanted me to do things that I wasn't interested in. And then I wanted him to do things he wasn't interested in. And I actually, in the back of my mind, was thinking, I don't want to do another book. There's just so much work. It's such a burden and a responsibility. So after a long, fractious conversation, he said, I want to try one more name on you. And don't jump down my throat. That'll give you an idea of the kind of conversation we were having. And I said, okay. And he said, have you ever thought about Woody Allen? And I said, thought about him, yeah. And he said, do you like his films? And I said, in general, some very, very much. And he said, do you think he abused his daughter, adopted daughter? And I said, I don't think so, but if I find out that he did, you'd be the first to learn about it, and I would certainly investigate that. And he said, so would you do a book about him? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, we have a deal. And thus I was ushered into, the House of Woody, without the enthusiasm or the great zest for it that you might think until the contract arrived, and then I have no zest. But that's because I just done Mel Brooks, and there was a bridge from Mel Brooks to Woody Allen, many bridges, in fact. But Sid Caesar was a bridge because they had both worked as writers together on a Sid Caesar television show, and they were friends. And a lot of people think of them in the same sort of broad bracket of Jewish comedians who became filmmakers. But I knew that it was a, difficult topic. I'm not Jewish, so every time I write about somebody whose Jewishness is important to them, either perversely in the case of Woody, since he's tries to throw it off in a lot of ways, but also advertises it in his persona, that it requires me to do a lot of thinking and be sensitive and be careful. So that, and then, the whole Mia thing, that, and then the vast body of work, it's a lot easier to do Mel Brooks, who only directed, whatever it is, 13 movies. I'd have to look it up, and produced a few and did a lot of other interesting things, because you only have to talk at length about a certain number of movies, and those movies, some of them you don't have to talk about at length because they're not that good, whereas Woody is, up to 50 plus, then the ones he only acted in, then the ones he did on shows he did on Broadway, and, and then lost work like his PBS. So it's massive, I did this with Hitchcock, and you couldn't skip a Hitchcock film, or somebody in the world would try to kill you, when you stepped out in public. So you're obliged to treat each one seriously. In Woody's case, there are some that are, obviously much more important and much better. And then there are some that aren't that good, so you can sort of skip through them. But on the other hand, if I was going to write what my editor wanted to be an authoritative, fair, complete, biography of Woody, which there really had not been researched and thought about in terms of the films, that was going to be a lot of work, that I needed to be paid for and have a contract. And that helped. That always helps my attitude. But it got worse because the book was contracted before the second round of Me Too denunciations and cancellations. And, by the time the book was done, Woody was pretty much canceled, pretty much permanently tainted. And therefore, everybody's appetite for the book, including the publishers, had diminished greatly. And the possible readership, had diminished greatly. So it was an arduous journey.
It's funny that you mentioned in terms of the publisher, because I was thinking, as soon as I picked up the book, I was thinking of Apropos Nothing, and how Alan's own memoir had to move publishing houses after it was kind of boycotted by members of the staff of the publishing house.
Yeah, well, their publishers are worried about that, because they're not so much worried about their staff, although some are, but they're also worried about other authors who might consider themselves, members of the Me Too movement, or feminist in the sense that they would condemn someone like Woody out of hand. And so they are worried about that, and they're worried about sales. And I can't. I'm not a big seller anyway, so I can't really argue with them on that basis. So it was a courageous decision on the part of the publisher, which ultimately, I think the publisher second-guessed their decision, and worried about it tremendously. Not for legal reasons, but really for commercial reasons and for political reasons.
Did you have lawyers going over the text?
Honestly, I don't know. The book went into suspension and a limbo for almost a year after it had been prepared for publication, vetted, copy edited, and it was in a first form of galleys. And at that point, the Wall Street Journal came out with a report that said that Woody Allen had dined with Jeffrey Epstein several times over the past years, because they're neighbors and knew each other, et cetera. And also, raising a question mark over how could they have friendly dinners together. Usually, I think almost always with other people, because Jeffrey Epstein was a famous big soiree thrower. And that froze the book again. Froze it. So I don't know what unfroze it, and my editor left, my supportive, good editor left, and I was handed over to a new editor who had never read any book I'd written, and probably still hasn't, and at the time was diffident about Woody Allen as a figure.
Right.
That's I think a fair word to to describe her attitude. It's a she, and then the book went into this dark limbo for months and months and months where we weren't sure. I really just wanted to get paid, which is a familiar author complaint. I had done my work, but this is a long way to the punchline, which is the lawyer, the very important, expensive in-house lawyer who carefully vetted the book. And good lawyers are as good as, and in my experience, better than copy editors. They catch things. And he was even catching New York things, that I had gotten wrong because I'm in Wisconsin. And it's another thing writing about somebody from New York is daunting, But he caught things, but inevitably he really loved it and he championed it. And my gut tells me that his championing of it and his passing of it, vetting it legally and saying this is good, that was a big mark in its favor in the corridors of the publishing house where it was briefly and seeed to be doomed, that it was not going to, it would be doomed there. Now it would come out eventually somewhere, because I think the book is very good. Woody's an interesting subject. Strangely, John, now you might disagree with me, but I don't have to like my subjects personally.
No.
And strangely, I don't.
Well,
for the most part, I strangely do not, and I'm obliged to like them professionally in the sense that I try not to dislike them. In print, many of them I've met, and so you couldn't guess. Out of my 20 to 25 books, excluding all the blacklisted people and all the screenwriters who I kind of like on principle. But there's only 2 of my biography subjects that I would say today, I really like those people as people before I get to them as artists. And then I really like them as artists too. But I like Woody Allen as an artist when he's artistic, I like Mel Brooks as an artist when he's artistic. Do I like them as people? I don't want to say I don't like them, but I'm not someone who has to like the person. That's not my job. I think it's cool when a biographer writes about somebody because they love them or they're passionate but I'm not that person. I'm not a film fan. I'm not a fan of celebrities. So I don't get all wet, over my subjects because I like them. Inevitably, I form respect for them, but that's not liking, if you know what I mean. So if you've read the book, then you know that, Woody is a very peculiar personality, to put it kindly, and not my kind of personality as a flesh and blood human being. He wouldn't cotton to me, and I wouldn't cotton to him probably, but that's not a prerequisite. So when my editor was saying, what do you think about Woody Allen? I wasn't thinking about how much I like him. I was thinking, I do like his films and I admire his career. And he had gotten himself into a deep hole personally. And of course, I like that sort of for a book, meaning for a life story, I like to have tragedy or stupidity or flaws in a human being. That part attracts me. But unraveling the Mia thing, that was very, very, very daunting and difficult and unpleasant.
It's interesting that I was kind of reading it and thinking at some points this is almost devolving or evolving or into a kind of Russian novel, that there's a feeling that, and in some ways it's a real positive of the book, I think, because ultimately a Woody Allen biography without if that had never happened in a parallel universe, would have been kind of rat-a-tat-tat repetitive. It would have been, and then he made another film, and then he made another film, and then he made another film. And heaven forfend that you want something terrible to happen in order to stir the waters. But those chapters were fascinating to read, I have to say. Those were the chapters where you sort of sat up and went, wow.
Well, you know, it doesn't have to be terrible. I mean, because Woody has a lot of behavior with women, you know, before you get to Mia, that's fascinating and fun, you know, to write about. And look, another thing about me is, even though I say I don't have to like somebody, I also say I don't dislike them, you know, please. But I have to somewhat identify with them, or at least meet them halfway as to who they are and accept it. I try not to be judgmental, and there's maybe only one of my books or two of my books in which I'm judgmental, or I feel like I'm too judgmental about somebody. I'm not judgmental about people's morality or their behavior or the naughty things they did or the sinful things they did. I'm not judgmental about it, because I've written about somebody who possibly killed his wife, you know, and I've written about somebody who had, you know, one marriage for the public, and then at night went home to like another marriage, and so was basically, you know, polygamous, you know, and then, you know, I've written about people who do way too many drugs and drink, and I'm just not a moralistic character. I don't see how you can be writing about Hollywood. It's just silly. Or show business in general. I think I just don't have that feeling, you know. I am a little moralistic about politics, and there's a blacklist theme, you know, in Woody's own career, and then in his life. And I am moralistic about blacklisting because I don't believe in it, and I think it's a right wing, and I think when people do things that they should be punished for, they should be charged, tried, convicted, and then sentenced to whatever the sentence is. But if all those steps don't take place, then I'm not like Trump. I don't think people are guilty regardless of facts. So, but other than that, I try not to be judgmental about Woody, and I try not to be overly judgmental about his films. There's a story I told on another interview that you may enjoy, which is, you know, my editor before he left, very sensitive, good guy, read a draft of the book and approved it, and it was going into it, and he said, "Pat, can you like this movie a little more? Because I really love it." And the movie was a Manhattan Murder Mystery, which I had a sort of, you know, let's say I was at a grudging, not great love of, you know. And I said, why? He said, oh, it's so charming, it's so funny. And, you know, so I listened to him. So, you know what, I put that back into the final revision, you know, because I try not to I don't say in the book, I interview, I poll 100+ U.S. film critics, including the very best known, and some who were alive, you know, reviewing Take the Money and Run when it was first released. So some ancient ones and some young ones. And I allow them to say what their 5 favorite Woody Allen movies are, or what they think are the 5 best. I never say what mine are. I don't. And mine are not theirs, you know. I will say my top 5 are not their top 5. I'd have a lot of trouble choosing my top 5 as they did, you know, because there are so many to choose from. But I don't say, so when my editor said, can you like this movie more? I was vastly amused, and I was stimulated, you know, to like it more, because I try to, like I say, meet Woody halfway, but I try to meet the audience halfway, the readers halfway. I don't want somebody to hate me because I love Stardust Memories. It's pointless. What I happen to think about Stardust Memories is meaningless, you know, in the scheme of things, even though it's a movie I really, really like and a lot of Woody people hate, you know. So there's no point in me foisting my views on people. I try to be, you know, I try to take a lot of things into account, and that includes what kind of person Woody happens to be off screen. You know, because off screen, Woody gives a lot of people the heebie-jeebies. You know, not me, but I've written about a lot of people who do a lot of peculiar things off screen, and some of them, you know, could give anyone the heebie-jeebies.
When did you what was your first contact with Woody Allen in terms of both artistically, and did you have any contact with him, personally? Did you ever meet up? Did you do any interviews for the book?
No. The only thing I did to to be honest, I glimpsed him on the street in New York, at times back in the 80s and 70s when he would walk around. But I did go to the Cafe Carlyle and see him play in his band one night when I was in New York seeing my editor. And the waiter who I got the last seat at the bar, and the waiter, I didn't say anything about what I was doing there, and I was just eating, drinking. And the waiter he said, Woody comes right out past me. And he'll brush right past me from the dressing room. And would I like to have a selfie? Would I like to have a photograph taken of Woody as he comes past me? And he would stop him and say, Woody is a fan. And then he would take a picture. And then I'd give the waiter $20 or something, And boy, that was tempting. Tempting, but ethical, or tempting, but weird, so
stalky slightly.
I was still tempted, but so I saw him, and he did brush by me, and it was a very interesting performance. No, I have 10,000 interviews with Woody Allen on my desk. And if you told me, here's a really great one, 10,001, I'd say, please, no. No more, because I had them all. He's done, but if you phoned him, he'd pick up the phone, So has he ever been, is there a question I would ask him if I could have one question alone with him? There might be, but it would be a question he's never been asked, and he'd probably leap across the table and try and strangle me. The question would be, I don't know. It would have something to do with hookers, I'm sure. The question, but it's an unimportant question, unless it were answered, then it would be fascinating. It's an unimportant question in the scheme of things, because he answers all questions. Now he answers a lot of questions the same way for 60 years. So he's a marked example of consistency in the way he answers things. He was consistent in the whole Mia Dillon thing, the way he said. His behavior is a very consistent behavior. So I read all the interviews in order to get the best quotes or the most interesting quotes, or to see where they went into this subject as opposed to that subject. And I'm obliged to read them all. There are several entire books of interviews with Woody. And so did I need to interview him? No. My agent was married to Walter Bernstein, who wrote The Front. So could I have pulled a string to meet him? Sure. By the way, I was walking around Paris when Coup de Chance was being filmed, and saw a flyer outside John Baxter's apartment near the Rue de l'Odeon, and it was a flyer to close down the street for a film that was known by the initials of, I don't know, it was Woody Allen's new project. So it was WANP, or something like that. So I knew immediately what it was. So I went there the next day and watched him film for 3 hours. Did I cross the street and ask him for an autograph? No. Did I cross the street and say, can I ask you one question, Mr. Woody? No. I showed great restraint and dignity. I just watched. The guy standing next to me, is elbowing me. What are they all looking at? That's Woody Allen. Which one is Woody Allen? Well, of course, it's pretty obvious, because he looks like Woody Allen.
The glasses, yeah.
Yeah. He said, "Oh, that's him. That's his." He said, Can I borrow your pen and a piece of paper? I'm going to go get his autograph." I said, "Well, I think they're going to stop you, and you're not going to." He said, "I'll bring the pen back. I'll bring the pen back." So I give him a piece of paper. I give him a pen. He goes running across the street. You'd think he'd be tackled, by police and stuff. He goes right up to Woody, and Woody signs it. He comes back. See, I got Woody's autograph. So anyway, I saw him. Yes, I've seen him. Do I want to interview him? No. I would just make him nervous, and there's no point. I once sat across the table from Who's the female actress in North by Northwest? It's out of my
Eva
brain.
Maria Saint.
Yeah, I sat at a small dinner party with her. I was seated at that table by a friendly person who knew I was writing a Hitchcock biography. I never mentioned I was writing a biography. I didn't take a single note. I listened to her all evening tell stories. By the way, she's one of the most charming and intelligent actresses from that era that I've ever met. And I didn't hardly met her. I was just at a table. It was a table of maybe 6 people. And, the next day she was in front of a big auditorium answering questions from like Hitchcock scholars and at a big conference. And she said, nothing different. Nothing different.
So the same stories on a roll.
Same stories, and I wouldn't quote her from a dinner unless she told me something astonishing, then I would contrive to. But so I wouldn't ruin her day by telling her I was writing a book, and could I ask her one question about Hitchcock? Was he really fat?
What did he smell like?
Yeah, you can't imagine the questions that were asked at the Hitchcock conference. I had to leave the room for some of them. There were also Teresa Wright was on stage, and so was Janet Leigh, because they would stand up and ask. I'm not putting them down, but they were like dewy-eyed in the presence of these people, and would ask the most commonplace questions you've heard 150 million times before. I mean, Janet Leigh not only wrote her own memoir, which was good, but she wrote a book about the filming of Psycho.
Right.
So my personal, I'm going to allow you to get a word in edgewise here in a second, but my personal philosophy of if a person has written a book, then that's probably it. And that's probably what you as an authoritative person should quote, unless they suddenly astonish you and say something really incredible. But you shouldn't send them a letter saying, can I come and interview you for an hour about the making of Psycho? I don't think you should.
No, not if it's Psycho and it's been covered as exhaustively as that.
Yes.
My first experience with Woody Allen was sort of back to front, because I remember for my birthday somebody gave me one of his books of prose. So I read that before I saw the films, and then I got out of the library. It was called Side Effects was a book I remember. Yeah. And I got out of the library a double album of his stand-up, and so I listened to his stand-up. All of this before I saw a Woody Allen film, and then they did a season on BBC Two, and I watched them kind of in close proximity, one every other night, I think. And I became a huge fan from the get-go. I must have been about 13, 14 at the time. So it really spoke to my sort of adolescent, sort of pubescent self. And I've been a fan ever since, I must admit. It's and so reading that, it was great sort of rediscovering that sort of stuff. But another thing that I really enjoyed in the book was the sense that there is this persona from the stories, the soufflés, as you call them, from the New Yorker, from the stand-up, which he very much creates over the course of a year or 2 years of really grueling work putting together that persona. There's a real bifurcation between that persona and who he really is, and even like his parentage and everything. That split really, really interested me, and those early chapters I thought were fascinating in the book.
See, that bifurcation doesn't really exist in the same way with like Mel Brooks, who
right.
is on screen the way he is off screen to a great extent. And it's one of the reasons why is he's not really acting, that's him, So my first book was about Cagney, and I've also written about Clint Eastwood and Jack Nicholson. And I'm very fascinated by the personas of actors who adopt various mannerisms and tics and traits in their characters they play in order to slide into another personality that they feel comfortable performing as. And it's always different. But, Cagney, for example, in real life was a very reticent, shy, quiet, poetic kind of personality, or let's say whimsical kind of personality. And then, on screen, he's an explosive, violent gangster and also a great, amazing dancer, so I was interested and Woody is more of an actor, than people give him credit for. He had to, in order to do stand-up, he had to become an actor and become someone else, on stage. Now, they all draw on themselves. So Clint Eastwood draws on himself. Cagney drew on his boyhood and people he knew, and he was a great observational actor. He would observe things in other people, and then he would draw on that himself. Nicholson is, in high school and back when he was an unknown, was always that kind of person, Jack. But then when he became a star and a great actor, he became Jack Plus, and everybody says that. So he's both people, just like Woody is both people. And Woody draws upon his own suffering and angst and cerebral ideas and his womanizing and about women in his comedy. And then he became a character, a kind of schlub on stage who, he couldn't even handle the microphone, a very nervous guy, and he can't do gadgets and stuff. That was, a lot of that was, there were true parts of that, in the real Woody. But, there were also parts that were completely exaggerated for comedy. And you can't really find the dividing line. So I don't know whether it's bifurcated or it's a meld, and then over time, with a lot of people who have very powerful screen personas, they become the persona to a great extent, even off camera. They're obliged to keep that performance up. I'm working on something about Catherine Deneuve now, and it's the same issue, which is fascinating. What is her and what is the invention, that she's created that we're all fascinated by? Where is the line? How do they meld? What is she drawing from? So you always find this. But so Woody, he's, most people say, oh, that's just Woody, but it isn't. It's a great performance as Woody. I like Stardust Memories and films like Deconstructing Harry because you get really wildly exaggerated versions of Woody, in which I find his performance to be great. I like Broadway Danny Rose because it's not because it's Woody, but because it's a great performance as Woody. He's doing some kind of Damon Runyon version of Woody, which is really, really a great performance. And so Woody doesn't always give a great performance, but he almost always gives a good one, because he's playing a version of himself that he is perfecting and changing over time. So the films that you first fell in love with are probably the ones I fell in love with, from Take the Money and Run up to Annie Hall, all those like early comedies, they all got votes for Woody's greatest films ever.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, because people love these pure, farcical comedies, and he moves out of that as an actor and a filmmaker, so that by the time even you get to Annie Hall, you see a guy putting on an amazing performance. He was nominated for Best Actor for Woody Allen, for Annie Hall, and I say in the book it's a crime, that he didn't win, because he was great. He had worked his performance up to this amazing level, and then he shifts gears and he becomes more of a naturalistic performer in ensemble pictures, and his performing even gets better. His performances get better and more varied. And he leaves that sort of farcical slapstick comedy side of himself almost entirely behind. He goes back to it after the Mia Farrow dust up of the early 1990s, I think in part out of a conservative feeling that he had to win audiences back, and it doesn't work as well, because it just doesn't work as well for older comedians to be falling on bananas. It just doesn't work as well. He's not bad at it, but he's not as funny.
Yeah. I mean, some of the revelations that I had reading through the book, especially when there's early films, but this extends later, is how much other people are involved in creating that character as well. And in terms of the films, in terms of people like Marshall Brickman and people coming in and writing with him, and even later with Douglas McGrath. And I was also interested in this sort of suspicion that goes through. It's a little bit like Clint Eastwood, that the facility they have for doing their thing leads them not to do their thing quite to the extent that they could really sort of break through into absolute greatness, if you like. There's a sort of like, okay, that's good enough. I don't need more than 2 takes. And when it comes to the theatre, especially those chapters you were talking about the theatre, it's sort of like he doesn't know anything about blocking, and he's not willing to learn, apparently.
Well, I don't know. I think he got, I mean, you're talking about Don't Drink the Water and then Play It Against Sam. And those were Play It Against Sam was a pretty big hit. And it's by the way, it's not considered a Woody Allen movie because he didn't direct it, but it's a pretty good movie with a very funny performance. I think the difference between him and Clint Eastwood is that Clint Eastwood has been doing that as an actor, his entire career, and the variation is narrow. Every once in a while, he'll do something like White Hunter, Black Heart, and remind you that he can act. But mostly he's doing the persona. Woody left one persona behind with Annie Hall, and then he starts up another persona, and then he does really, really well throughout the 1980s until he has. I mean, some of the films with Mia Farrow are great. And it's important to say when you talk about Marshall Brickman or Douglas McGrath, they're really were very useful and great collaborators for Woody at certain points in his career. But he needed the woman, the lead actress, too, so that Diane Keaton was enormously helpful. Louise Lasser, in some scenes in some films, was enormously helpful because a guy like that needs a really good foil. It was very hard to call Diane Keaton's shit on camera because she's being kookier than him, at times. And so that made them twice as funny. It made him twice as funny. He knew that. And the same is true of Mia Farrow, who gets a bad rap from a lot of people in Woody's career, which is stupid because several of the films with her are among his greatest, in part because she's great. She should have won an Oscar for Broadway Danny Rose. She is super hilarious, and she's funnier than him. Now, he understood that. He understood that as a writer, first of all, which is very important, as an incredibly important part of his persona and his artistic development, that he's a writer. But he also understood it as a performer, that it wasn't as good if he had a bunch of schmoes around him. It couldn't always be, I don't want to say he was a schmo, but it couldn't always be a second banana. It couldn't always be Tony Roberts. He needed something else to really rivet him as well as the audience. And it had to be a really great leading lady. And you later see this when, Penelope Cruz comes along as Scarlett Johansson, that he understands this as a writer and as a director. Whereas with Clint, Clint is more of a solo act. And the people who come in and out of his movies are relatively unimportant in the scheme of things. He's a solo act, and then he has like a tag along, and then he has a young woman that goes up to his shoulder, and then he's doing Clint, Only I Can Fix It, movie after movie, with a lot of variation within those limitations. But sometimes, and it was true in Nicholson's career too, sometimes a great female lead lifts everybody up like an equal person. And Diane Keaton was for a time equal, and Mia Farrow was for a time equal, on screen with Woody. And it made Woody he knew this, though. It wasn't a shock. And he talks about in the book, all the things that Diane, in interviews that are quoted in the book, of all the things Diane Keaton taught him. about filmmaking, about decor, about women. Well, this was being channeled into his writing and his filmmaking. And, if you see Take the Money and Run, which is a really cute film, or Bananas, which is a really cute film, they don't have the same balance and strength, really, of the ones that come along with Diane Keaton, who takes the movies to another level. You see right away that she's a star, and that she's his equal. She's gone on, by the way, to one of the great careers, relatively unsung, after Annie Hall, even though she gets nominations and people know who she is and she's really important. But she's a great actress. He discovered her not only as an actress, but he discovered her as his equal. Yeah, and it's, Jack tried to do that with Angelica, and it didn't really work for Jack and Angelica. Clint tried to do that with Sandra Locke, and it worked worse, and they had some good films together that people really praised to the skies, I would say, overpraised to the skies. But I don't think you can overpraise Diane Keaton and Woody, or Mia and Woody, when they're really doing well in a movie together, right down to Hannah and Her Sisters or Crimes and Misdemeanors,
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, even one of the many surprising moments in your book is when it's in the middle, if not after the 1990s revelations, and they're in the sort of they're just over the first sort of court case, and so everything is poisoned, and he's prepping another movie, and he sort of says, do you think Mia could do this role? Do you think we could phone Mia up and get her to do this role? And it's like, I don't know if she'll want to,
Yeah, and she didn't do much afterwards. She didn't do much before, between Rosemary's Baby and Woody, and then she didn't do much afterwards. But those 10 years, or whatever it was, 12, she did a lot. And she's really, really good because she has a good writer, a good director, and someone who understood that she had to be equal on the screen to him, that she would lift it up. By her greatness.
Purple Rose of Cairo. She's the lead.
Purple Rose of Cairo. Yeah, I'm not mentioning, the one like Radio Days. I'm not mentioning the ones he's not in, but Radio Days. She's great. Again, she's playing a kind of outside the box Mia Farrow role. Not the kind of Mia Farrow role that you think of her as. As a kind of sweet, simpering. No, she's brassy. And anyway, yeah, she's great. When they did that whole documentary series attacking Woody, which is I mildly attack in the book because it was stupid, but they were obliged by their own narrow-mindedness to completely, because they're painting Woody with a broad tar brush, they're obliged not to mention Mia's movies with Woody, or how great they are, and how this was an artistic, before this was a personal disaster, it was a personal triumph and a great personal professional collaboration with really great films, which I'm saying you can't really say the same about, Jack Nicholson and his female leads, or Clint Eastwood and his female leads, or even Jimmy Cagney, who was much more of a man's star, a manly star, and a lot of different actresses came in and out of his career. But if you want to say, well, yeah, Joan Blondell was great, well, she was great, but she was not his equal, and It wasn't set up that way. Woody, as a writer and as a filmmaker and as an actor, wants the best possible actress to be his co-star, who will lift him up with her performance.
Yeah, you have to go back to sort of Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn for a sort of sense of a camaraderie and two people lifting their game in
always. And you see it when they walk into the room in a scene. You see all the attention goes up, in the audience and on the set too, because they know it, they're sizing each other up, it's like, you don't see it very often nowadays, but, you might see it if Julia Roberts and George Clooney are in a good movie together and they enter into a room, that they have a tremendous familiarity with each other. They're both supernovas, and they're going to underplay while they wait to spring the trap on the audience. And so you don't see it as much in the same way. You certainly don't see it repeatedly the way Woody formed that great partnership with Diane Keaton. And it was, to some extent, a partnership. I go in the book into like, how much of Diane Keaton is in Annie Hall or vice versa. Like how much did they write of her personal self into that? It's quite amusing to look into, right down to the point where, Woody later gives an interview saying, well, la-di-da, that was, something that she said all the time. And so we put it in the script or something like that. And, this was pointed out to Diane Keaton and she said, was it? Did I? I don't know. Well, I guess if Woody said so, so there are things that you get from a comfort level with the female star that Woody sought in those two relationships, and then it taught him, to go on to Bullets Over Broadway or Match Point or even Midnight in Paris, which is hardly about women, but there are like very interesting women. And it taught him, that you don't put that actress in that movie without giving her a great scene. There's no point. So he's trying to write a really good scene for, actresses and women. And he's thinking on a lot of different levels, including acting. That's why, he's really a great caster, and he had a great casting agent, but he had a great eye for what he wanted because he wrote something. And then when they walked in the room, he said, oh yeah, he did, go away now. I don't want to talk to you anymore. He didn't want to meet. He didn't want to shake their hands. Angelica Houston wants to like have lunch with him during the making of Crimes and Misdemeanors. And he said, oh, I have a cold, not today. No, why? What would we talk about? And she never gets the lunch,
Javier Bardem, he says 2 lines to him. It's sort of like, what are you doing here? Is one of the lines. It's like, you're filming me today, Woody. I'm in the scene.
Yeah. I mean, he has a sixth sense about, which is a cliche about actors. He sees an actor and he says, that's perfect. Go away. You'll be great. And then, he really, I talk about in the book how often he directed, Oscar-nominated performances by men or women. He has a pretty good record. I'd say more, I don't know, I'd have to look it up, but I'd say more than Scorsese, because, and maybe more than Spielberg. And I don't know who's in second place, because he's good at it. And those movies, made by Scorsese and Spielberg, they're not built around performances in the same way. Although they have great performances.
Yeah. What about this is one of the sort of persistent things in his career, is that sort of split between the serious and, in Stardust Memories, it's that even the aliens come down and say, we really liked your early funny ones. So it's something he jokes about in the films. I'm a big fan of Stardust Memories as well, I have to say. This sort of persistent, I've watched some of his films. I remember watching Cassandra's Dream when it first came out. I think I even watched Match Point and was just befuddled by it because I was just waiting for it to get funny, and it doesn't get funny at any point, and you're sort of at the end you're thinking, maybe I've been, my expectations have led me to totally miswatch this film, if that's possible.
Well, he always, his list of favorite movies doesn't change much, if you leave aside musicals, and it's the serious Italians. And in America, it's, the serious Americans. It's Orson Welles, who is not a funny comedic filmmaker at all. And Hitchcock, who's kind of witty, and sometimes quite amusing, but is also, bleak and gripping, much of the time. So Woody had a crush on, the really, really serious, bleak playwrights, Tennessee Williams, but also Ibsen, Chekhov, anybody you want to name who's bleak.
Yeah, Eugene O'Neill, yeah.
Eugene O'Neill, and he always aspired to do that. Honestly, I think he does in Blue Jasmine, and he also does in the Wonder Wheel. That's a rather humorous Eugene O'Neill movie, because at times it's very humorous, and it's always got two levels going on, but it's also Eugene O'Neill, and he almost wanted to do that, and then he got sidetracked by doing that without any humor in Interiors, which did not get a single vote from any of the 100 plus critics as one of his best movies of all time, even though it was nominated for a half dozen major Oscars at the time. And then he this all the way up through September, a movie called September, which most people haven't seen, probably for good reason. He was every once in a while going back to this, bleak, tragic thing, but he leaves it aside for like Crimes and Misdemeanors, which is a very bleak movie, really, and as a great crime story. And then he returns to it late in his career with movies like Match Point, but really Vicky Cristina Barcelona, Cassandra's Dream, which I happen to like a lot, and he gets more into drama, not tragedy, but there's a tragic undertow. And I don't think, he did a better film than Match Point. He did many that were funnier. but I think Match Point, a lot of people, named Match Point as one of their 5 to 10, as I think it ranks in the top 10. And so he went back to things. He never lets go of an idea. He never gives up. People wanted him all along, including his agents, were telling him, please don't do tragedies, do tragedies with some humor, or dramas with some, bleak dramas with some funny scenes, but yeah, so his natural impulse is to be funny, but his intellectual impulse, meaning what he admires artistically, is De Sica and La Strada, the bleakest Italian, which, by the way, I also greatly love those movies. So you could see why he starts thinking that way, saying, I would like to try that. A guy who watches, Bicycle Thieves every year wants to make a movie like Bicycle Thieves, or he wants to try it, because he believes in trying. I love that, by the way. He believes in trying and failing. He believes in that. He believes he always fails, so he may as well try. I love that. Then he goes outside of his box. Now, other people hate it. There's no question about it. Other people, but by the same token, there are many, many people, critics as well as, serious, intelligent people who say, he's ugly, he doesn't turn me on, I can't believe him in a romantic comedy. I don't get that at all. That's partly what the comedy is about.
I was shocked by how many reviews you quoted that were just like, he's ugly and Jewish, and yeah. I mean,
there's a lot of. He's right about anti-Semitism. He might, he's right about it. It was in the air very often in his career, sometimes explicitly from critics, and I think it's there. I think it's there lingering like a bad odor over the whole post 1992 downfall of Woody, the cancel culture, etc. I think he's a target. He's an easy mark because he's ugly, he's Jewish, and he's not funny anymore. But it's all. I don't want to say subconscious, but it's subliminal. And it's part of it. I believe it's part of it. I was going to say that doesn't mean that nobody could possibly be canceled who's Jewish or ugly or any of that. It doesn't mean that. I just mean in his case, it's been part of his comedy his entire life. It's been part of his identity, and it's been part of the reaction to him. his entire life, and he puts it into his movies over and over again. So it's not like it's not a secret. And I think people, I think it's one of the knocks against him that's totally unfair, as if like comedy in America isn't, greatly Jewish. Anyway, the whole tradition of comedy, television, stand-up, vaudeville, etc. It's a lot of things, but there's also a lot of Jewish influence.
Absolutely. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but I detected there was a sort of pushback to this notion when you were describing the 1990s, the Dylan Farrow allegation, and that whole thing, because you kept repeating a phrase about Dylan Farrow as being the blonde little girl. And I thought, am I detecting here that you've not explicitly said this is because he's a dark little Jew, but is that the sort of thing that was going on there?
Well, in my mind, you mean? I was partly doing it as the writer's trick, so I don't have to just keep saying Dylan or Farrow. So I came up with a phrase to describe her, which, by the way, she was described that way in countless, endless, newspaper and magazine report. But there is that aspect to it, it's the and Mia's blonde too,
right?
Or blondish.
I mean, there's that whole bizarre Ronan Farrow being the son of Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, which I also deal with in the book. Sure. It's like, Frank Sinatra, he's a respectable father. So we're gonna say Ronan might be Frank's son because Woody, he's a bit of a scurrilous guy, but Frank, he's spotless. Model citizen.
Never put a foot wrong.
Yeah, but well, I do think that's that is part of what people react to just when you hear the name Woody Allen. It's like the way he looks, and even in the 1990s, Jack Matthews was an intelligent. He used to be a film critic and a film reporter at the LA Times. Then he moves to Newsday, and he talks about how a lot of the backlash against his films was anti-Semitic. He wrote about that publicly. Or let's put it this way: there's a whiff of anti-Semitism to it. That this, first of all, they can't even believe that, there's a separation between what he does on screen and what he does in his private life, or that a movie like Husbands and Wives, or any movie that follows, isn't some wild exaggeration of what's going on in his public life. They just see it as, his personal life has been put on the screen and he's after young women and, and he was after young women, but
well, this is what I like about the book, Patrick, and this is where I would sort of like really encourage people to read it, even if they feel that they have made up their minds about Woody Allen, is that you're very even-handed. I didn't get the feeling that this was like you were, and it kind of it tracks that you didn't sort of meet up with Woody and have interviews and things, because it didn't feel like you were in any particular camp. It felt like you were, writing it. So, for instance, there are bits where he says, "Oh, I've always gone out with women who were my age," and you're like, "No, you haven't. That's not true." And he is remarkably cloth-eared in his defenses. I mean, I remember seeing that news conference he did from the hotel, when he's trying to get ahead of the story, and he starts with one of those little coughs that is straight out of his stand-up, and it's just like, oh, you're performing. This is your, which you could say that's a natural human thing to do, but it also is just like, not today, Woody, not. Don't go into the courtroom saying, "Oh, we're going to get the kids back." Don't. It looks so manipulative and wrong, and it's like you've donned the armor of this persona for your whole career, and now you can't get out of it and give a sincere, straightforward answer to some really serious questions.
Yeah, and it's, but this off-putting nature of him, I think there's at one point, his lawyer has to come outside the courtroom and say something to the press after Woody has had a terrible day on the stand trying to be Woody, but needing a writer and a director, before he got to the stand. And the lawyer says, well, you have to understand, that's just him. And if you read the book, he's that way when he meets an actor. He's that way when he's on the set and people want to interact with him. He's that way when someone says, "Can I ask you about this scene in the script?" He's that way. He has no. I almost would say, I don't want to say this because it's probably. But he almost has, a mental condition, that he cannot escape from, which he is unable to relate to people well on a personal level, or unless he picks up a microphone and stands on a stage and starts telling jokes on a big level. So when he gets into a courtroom, yeah, he's like, makes. Some days he's good or better, and other days he's terrible because he's not good at it. He can't do that. I don't think you could rehearse him to do that. He's not good at showing warmth. He's not good at understanding why people think it's odd that he wants to work through the lunch hour and not shake their hands. He doesn't understand that. Do I hate him for that? No. Does it make him off-putting and odd and unlikable to a lot of people? Yes. But there are other people like in his inner circle who understand it and love him. He mentioned Doug McGrath or Marshall Brickman, who passed away recently. These weren't like fleeting relationships. These were very strong, good friendships because I think to some extent they got to know him better, but also their artistic personalities, and they understand that artistic personalities are sometimes peculiar people. And Woody is peculiar. And he came out of his shell and made his life and career by standing up on stage and adopting a persona, which now follows him as a curse. And in the courtroom, it followed him as a curse because, as you said, or in his press conference, because he came out, he wanted to give a performance, but it was going to be a bad performance because he wasn't very good at it, winging this thing that he was really uncomfortable in being in this situation. But look, that's not to say he wasn't also stupid and did really stupid things during that whole thing. His official biographer, was called up and asked, because his official biography had come out like a year before, half a year before, and the official biographer didn't know anything about it. What? He's breaking up with Mia? What? He had a relationship with Sun Yi? He neglects to mention this to his official biographer. So that's the kind of person he is. He's very, he's blinkered, He's very.
That's it. So when they talk about, I think the judge mentions this as well in the case. It's sort of like, and didn't you realize the impact that your relationship with Sun Yi would have on, the wider family? And he says, "Oh, I didn't think we'd get caught." I mean, he doesn't say that or word, but it's words to that effect. It's sort of like, I thought we'd have a relationship and then she'd go away and nobody would know about it.
He doesn't even know how to give an artful answer to that. Because he should have said, "I wish I had thought more about that." But he doesn't. He's not reflective about that at all. And also, he's in a courtroom. He doesn't know what to say. It's like, well, I didn't think we'd get caught. I think to be fair, that's probably an honest answer. Sadly, that's probably the honest answer. Yeah, and then sadly to follow, I didn't realize I'd fall in love with her or that Mia would catch us. Really, what planet are you born on? So to be fair, it's an honest answer out of like a blinkered mind.
It reminds me of the bit where he starts playing poker when he's quite young, and then somebody says, "It's a waste of time, don't you? You know how much time this?" And it's like, oh yeah, and he just gives it up straight away. And it's that sort of, I mean, you had mentioned, and you're correct to be cautious about wanting to sort of diagnose anybody with a mental condition, but it does feel a little bit even sociopathic at a certain point, that there's
well, I would say sociopathic is pretty strong, but I would say like on the spectrum, I mean, he did get out. He did get out of the draft, 59 or 60, whenever it was. I'd have to take a look at my book, with a letter from a psychiatrist that we don't know what that letter said. And then he was in psychiatry for like about 35 years after that. He was cured by Sun Yi, and by marriage. And then he dropped it, and it became a big factor in his work. So it's a fun thing in his work besides. But we don't know what he look. Anybody who goes to see a psychiatrist for 35 years, and that would include me, but I haven't. But anybody who does would have to say, yeah, because I have psychological problems. Or I have a mental disorder.
Or I have a lot of money that I really don't have a clue what to do with.
Yeah. So obviously, unlike, let's say, Clint, who's like Mr. I know what I'm doing. One take, let's move on. I know what I'm doing. I don't think, has Clint ever been to a psychiatrist? I don't know. No, but it would be startling, to hear that because he's full of confidence and security. So Woody would have to say he has psychological problems, or had them, and that's why he went to therapists. And he'll say, I went and I told them my problems and I bored them. So, but we don't know exactly what he talked about. So what you see when Woody walks into a courtroom or when he gives a press conference is you see the guy without the persona trying to put on the persona like a ill-fitting coat, and then acting out in public with psychological problems. Like I say, the guy who doesn't want to shake hands or wants to work through the lunch hour, who doesn't even want to make eye contact with, people on the crew, who like on his tour, a musical world tour that was filmed, by Barbara Koppel, doesn't know the names of the members of his band, and gets reproached by Sun Yi because he thanks one member of the band but never mentions the name of the other members of the band, and it's a small band and they're traveling. They're traveling together. So this is a psychological syndrome of some sort. Let's put it that way. And is that pleasant? No. Is it off-putting? Yes. Can it give you really bad signals? Yes. But I don't think it's proof of guilt.
No, absolutely not. And I mean, there's a couple of last questions I want to get into. So at the very beginning of our conversation, you said that you said to the editor, if I find proof, you'll be the first to know. If I make up my mind about Woody's guilt, so to speak, you'll be the first to know. Was there any moment where you felt the sort of spectrum of your conviction going one way or another, or did you just find yourself completely undecided and that doubt was enough for you to say, okay, well, he's innocent until proven guilty?
Well, I looked for proof, and again, to be fair, I would have been happy to find proof. I wasn't carrying a torch, one way or another. I looked for.
It would have shifted the book quite a lot.
Sure. The book would certainly, that part of the book, but as you lead up to what happens, he's hardly like a public hero number one, right, in his personal behavior, and he's already seeing young women. That's why we have Manhattan, and other things. But so, and if I was the father of a teenage girl going to high school, and Woody took her for a date when he was 50 years old or something, I'd be furious, or worse than a date. I'd be furious. And I think Mia has, plenty of reasons to have gone crazy and be really, really angry and hurt forever by what happened. That said, I looked very hard. I looked at everything that had been written. I looked at all the reports. I called the official in Connecticut who gave a press conference saying that he had enough reason to indict or like bring charges. I can't remember the exact terminology. It's an important part of the book. It's only a couple paragraphs, but this was I called him and I spoke to him. First, I had written him a letter. He called me and left a really angry message on my machine, saying, how dare I write him and ask him to speak about this, So I called him up and I said, hey, it's my job to ask you to speak about this, And he said, well, if he ever spoke about this, he would never practice law again. I said, well, and my understanding is you're retired,
Right.
And, what I wanted to ask him is, and I did ask him, and he said, if I answered, what I wanted to ask him was, what is your theory of the case that allows for a child molester to act on that impulse once, when all medical literature and all current understanding of that terrible kind of behavior indicates it's a lifelong, obsessive, repetitive behavior that can't be cured? What is your theory about why this happened just once ever in this particularly fraught, family breakup? And he said, he screamed into the phone, if I answered that question, Woody Allen would, sue me into the grave, And I said, fair enough, but can't you answer it in such a way that makes me understand what your thinking was? I told you I would be sued, so he was afraid of being sued by Woody, which I think is fair enough, because actually Woody might, sue him if he made any kind of public statement. But he's also in the documentary, this multi-episode documentary that supposedly establishes Woody's, guilt supposedly for molesting Dylan. And he doesn't say anything interesting.
This is Alan V. Farrow.
Yeah, the problem with the case, so not to give people the wrong idea, John, but there's no aha moment in the book.
No. In fact, that's what
if I had found an aha moment, it would be in the book.
Absolutely.
And I'd be, hey, I found it out. No one else knew, and I found it out. The problem with the case, from the point of view of everyone who wants to condemn Woody, and that includes many people who don't even care about whether or not they have any evidence to prove he did something. These include many people who hate his films and don't think he's funny and think he's ugly, But the problem with it is that there are no facts, there's no charges, there's no court case, there's no indictment, there's no facts or evidence other than a young girl said something according to what her mother said she said, and then the young girl grew up to repeat it, and the mother supports her. And then on the other side, you have someone who, and that story, by the way, has shifted a little bit, which I go into in the book. And then on the other hand, you have this guy who's a really, really questionable, dubious personality off camera, with many of the traits of his dubious personalities on camera, who insists nothing of the sort happened. And so you really have nothing but a she said versus he said, because there's two she's. And do I think the Pharaohs, including Ronan, who's, I would say, I go into his motives and aspect in the book, do I think they utterly believe what they say? Well, yeah, I do, Do I think Woody utterly believes what he says? Yeah, I do. Do I think that anyone else is ever going to figure out what exactly occurred? I think the best guide at the moment is my book, for what exactly occurred. It's not a pretty story. It doesn't make anybody look good, but right now it does not involve facts of child molestation. It just involves allegations which have never gone to court or arrest or imprisonment or even lawsuit. So that's all I can say. And then I'm against, on principle, blacklisting of someone who may or may not have done what they're accused of doing, but we have no facts to prove it. There really are no facts to allege it, to be fair. I mean, in other words, it's almost entirely witness hearsay, testimony and imputations, and there's really no facts to allege it.
If I was to play devil's advocate,
please do.
The Me Too movement would argue, sustainers of the Me Too movement would argue that the law as it stands has let down child abuse and sex abuse victims consistently. And so the idea that a legal process in the 1990s against one of the most powerful men in the culture might have been swayed in his favor is not beyond, it doesn't have the same parity as he said, she said seems to imply.
Except one of them is Mia, so there's two she's involved
as well. Yes, yeah, absolutely. And Mia, and you're right, Mia is a powerful figure, and that documentary doesn't make. She's a powerful
figure, and as I said earlier, she has good reason both to be angry, and she has good reason to have been driven crazy with anger, and she has good reason to believe her daughter. But there's also good reason, as I tell the story, for all of this perhaps not to have happened in the way that it's alleged.
Right.
And you can say that about parody, and that's true. Big generalizations really don't interest me greatly because, first of all, I'm going to agree with you. There's no parody. But I also say, in the book that there's such a thing as the Scottsboro Boys, who are convicted on female hearsay because it's a racist context, and that means a poisoned social context. Okay. And I'm saying, yeah, there's a poisoned social context here too, but also, you say after 1992, well, he's so powerful. He's not. He gets diminished. He's a very difficult cockroach to squash. So, he keeps coming back with films that defy all expectations and are very successful, either with the Oscar people or with audiences, but he is diminished till today, right? Today, he's canceled. By the way, they're successful. Bravo, cancel culture. He's canceled. If that's what you want, that's what you got. So I'm just in the position of saying what you don't got are facts, and if that doesn't make you a little nervous or anxious, that's fine. That's your business. But I pointed out, and there are actually people quoted, there are feminists quoted in the book who said at the time, first of all, some people said crazy, inaccurate things. So the opposite of fact. But then, by saying, he married his daughter. How can you believe a man who married his daughter? So they said crazy, inaccurate things. But then there are people who said, I don't care if I'm wrong. We should believe the woman, and we should support the victim. Have they never heard of the McMartin case, where children said they were abused by child care workers, and there was a huge investigation and criminal complaints brought and people's lives ruined, and it turned out to be the imagination of children. So yeah, I think Dylan Farrell should be listened to, and I also think she's worth listening to still, However, facts are stubborn things, and if you don't have them, it's a problem. So I don't think there's parity. But by the way, there's no parity necessary for lawsuits. And by the way, this whole thing of like they're powerless, they have Ronan Farrow and Nicholas Kristof, two Pulitzer Prize winning journalists, in their documentary alleging non-facts to be true.
Yeah, and the three-part HBO documentary isn't exactly not exactly standing on a corner.
They're not powerless people. Mia during the trial would say, well, Woody's got a big phalanx of publicity and lawyers, and she was represented by an extremely powerful lawyer, very well, and she did a good job. She's better on the stand. She was better on the stand, and I think partly because her anger and her hurt was real, whereas Woody was like still trying to absorb everything that was happening to him as a result of him not doing anything out of the ordinary from his point of view. So, I mean, I'm not sitting here saying Mia shouldn't have won that case, although she certainly did poison, the well against Woody's son, Ronan, permanently. And she tried to do it with her other kids with varying degrees of success, because one of her children eventually comes back to Woody's side and completely rebuts everything. See, most people don't want to...
And also Sun Yi is a witness of the life in the Farrow household.
Yeah, it's all not one-sided. So mostly people aren't, thinking about it in its nuances, because its nuances are ugly and unpleasant, and they're not fun to dwell over, But the nuances reveal the facts sometimes, and the real problem is just the problem with a crime. If there's a crime, there has to be evidence and there has to be facts. So is there a crime? I don't know. At this late remove in time, how will we? I say in the book, we'll never know unless there's a deathbed confession by Woody or a deathbed confession by Dylan, by Woody that I did it, or by Dylan that I made it all up, or I might have made it all up, I can't remember. And barring that, and even that doesn't tell you everything, because it's too late for people's memories to be trusted. So if you go back, put it together, assemble the story, it's a very interesting story, but it's unpleasant. Nobody comes out looking good, and it's very unclear exactly what happened. So I'm not saying I'm clearing him of it. I'm not declaring him innocent. I'm declaring him he hasn't been arrested, indicted, charged, sued. It's a I wouldn't say it's a witch hunt, because it's a bit of a witch hunt, like when people said to Woody, "Oh, this is terrible," at one point he said no, because it was during COVID. He said, "No, COVID is terrible. What's happening to me is just a little thing," So, and it's an index of a bigger thing happening. It's like it was happening in a lot of areas of show business, which didn't reflect well on Woody, because it overlapped and it made Woody look just as bad as it was happening to everybody else. So it's like, the Venezuelans being deported to El Salvador. Okay, maybe there's a dozen of them that weren't, gang members. Who cares? Let's just deport them all. So a lot of people got swept up in Me Too, and the vast majority of them appear to be very guilty of bad behavior. But Woody's behavior, most of which is detailed in the book, in such a way as to not take his side or to be sympathetic. Most of his behavior with women, while questionable, is not illegal. Meaning like you were the father. By the way, I talk about how the parents of these people, are being bad parents, by like the parents of Mariel Hemingway in Manhattan are bad parents, and the parents of the young women that Woody was dating were bad parents. Or let's put it this way, they were not, super strict.
Maybe protective. I think it's really interesting, because I know there's been this thing about Manhattan, and I haven't rewatched it, so I can't speak to it in terms of having not rewatched it recently. But I remember watching that in England and sort of thinking, well, what's the problem? Because in England, the age of consent was 16. I remember coming out of school and seeing cars pulling up to pick up girls, and so the people driving the cars at least 2 years older than the girls.
Well, the age of consent in New York and Connecticut is also 17, or I think it's 17. I researched it and it's in the book. So
yeah, it's 17. You put it in the book.
He was within the age of consent, and then they were pushing it for the film. They were pushing it because that's what he does. He exaggerates, a reality that he's comfortable with writing as fiction. So then he exaggerates it, and I never liked the film for that reason, because I thought it was ridiculous that nobody in the film said, "Hey, you're too old and she's too young," from the parents to his friends, and so I never liked the film, and I'm not from New York, so I don't have a romantic vision of New York anyway, but that then is used against him now by Me Too. Well, he was grooming women in films. He was grooming them off camera. They had a lot of trouble with that documentary of going back to his old young girlfriends and getting them to say anything bad about him, because apparently he was a good date.
Yeah.
Apparently he was a good guy. He wasn't doing terrible things to them. And so I'm not very moralistic about it. But again, like I say, if I was a father and, I had a young daughter and I think a lot of it is like, oh, he's too ugly, too old, and too Jewish to have a girlfriend like that, in Manhattan. By the way, an amazing number of female critics, who had qualms about Woody, chose Manhattan as one of their 5 favorite movies of all time, 5 greatest Woody Allen movies of all time. And I think it ranks on the list as like number 3 or 4, in votes. I would never vote for it. I don't like it. And I think it betrays Woody's proclivities at that point in time in an embarrassingly puerile way. I think it's a puerile movie. But that's not, that's why I don't like the movie. It isn't why I don't like Woody's behavior in private life, which at that point in time particularly.
What do you think his legacy is going to be? Because I mean, he's knocking on now, and he might. I mean, I watched Coup de Chance in preparation for this interview, and it's a reasonably okay film. It's nothing.
I like it. I think it's pretty good, especially considering the last one wasn't very good at all. Rifkin's Festival. It was very feeble. It's pretty good. Well, what is his legacy? I think it's sort of like the Blacklist. The Blacklist in Hollywood really wouldn't have happened without pressure from big business and banks on the East Coast. It wouldn't have originated in Hollywood, or wouldn't have had enough power in Hollywood to become a blacklist. Here you see, when you interview critics, and real critics, like Molly Haskell and David Thompson, and younger ones as well, that they realize that his legacy is shadowed forever. They still think he's a very great filmmaker, and that he made very great films. So it depends on who you talk about. Probably, in the future, people will say, who was Woody Allen? Because he will become so marginalized by this cancel culture that he will have trouble getting revivals or retrospectives. There was trouble getting my book published, So I'd say his legacy today is very problematic in America, but around the world and in America, there is a very, very strong, small, vocal block of people who believe in his possible innocence, but also believe in his artistry with his greatest films. And as I say, with this poll that I did, not only did many of his 50 films get votes, at one point I write, it's a lot easier to list the films that didn't get votes, because between 30 and 35 Woody Allen films got votes from good critics as being among the 5 or 10 best he ever made. So that's a pretty good body of work.
It's a good batting average.
And yeah, but will he be remembered as a great filmmaker upon his death? No, I'm sure and hopefully he will live long, but he's already lived long, but hopefully he'll live longer. No, I think probably the first line of his obituary will be, how his fortunes plummeted. But they plummet by degrees. It makes for an interesting story because he's sort of clawing his way back to respectability by when Dylan resurfaces, various media people like Christoph and Ronan Farrow jump in, and then they kind of whip up enthusiasm from Me Too. And they do whip it up. They work at getting the attention of the Me Too movement, and then they finally get him, and get him canceled so that he can't get films made, he can't get them reviewed, he can't get them financed in America. And he has to go overseas, just like blacklisted Hollywood people did in the 1950s.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that there is a sort of European resistance to American reaction, which sometimes can be very wrong-headed. I think sometimes it can be sort of like sort of up yours America. We're gonna show the latest Roman Polanski, and we're gonna show the latest, all in the same. I mean, I don't think it does Woody Allen any favors necessarily to be shown in the same festival as Coup de Chance was shown with the latest Polanski. So it's sort of like, one is a convicted rapist and the other isn't, and also
a serial
precisely with a series.
Yeah, I mean, one of the arguments in Woody's favor, regardless of what you accept in terms of the Me Too movement's condemnation of him, is that there's no evidence he's a serial anything. Criminally. So that's why I wanted to ask that question of the legal official in Connecticut who investigated the case for Mia Farrow and Dylan back in real time. But yes, Europe is a different question. But even in Paris now, in France, which is a bastion of Woody Allen support, it's also now a bastion of rising anger, from the Me Too.
I mean, we have to point out that a lot of this anger is very justified and very well founded.
Absolutely. But I'm saying, Polanski has trouble in France now.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Woody, Coup de Chance did pretty good there, and I think there was rumors he was going to make his next film in Italy because he could get Italian financing. Yeah. So look, there's open-minded as well as blinkered people, and I don't want to say one is one or one is the other, but they're everywhere. But in America, it's harder to be open-minded for a lot of reasons, including our culture here, our president here, our society. There's a puritanical, history to America that factors into all of this, as well as anti-Semitism. So, but there's intelligent, artistic, open-minded people everywhere, and so he has his fans, he has his followers, and he has his people who wish to believe in him everywhere, but it's a greatly diminished legacy. I mean, that gives me no pleasure to say that. The only thing I would say is he did what he wanted to do artistically for a long time. He had a big, long run. It's not like he was cut down like a lot of people who were cut down, I think, quite realistically by the Me Too movement in Hollywood and elsewhere. Sounds like they deserve it, and they're not going to come back. I actually think there should be a road back. Somehow there should be some agreement on what a road back might look like, and also like what are degrees of offenses, But nonetheless, Woody got away with a career which is a pretty good career for a long, long time. And he may not have much of a legacy in America because of the way that he has been canceled, but I don't think you can't write him out of history.
So, Patrick, last question. What have you been reading? Have you been reading any decent film books?
What am I reading? Well, behind me, I've been reading a biography of Simón Bolívar, and I'm reading, because it's about 600 pages long, I've got the halfway mark and switched to Robert Crais, the the best Los Angeles crime writer. And I'll tell you, because it's interesting, that I've been reading the memoir. I'm going to pitch this for the publisher. Been reading the memoir of Anthony Ray, the son of Nicholas Ray, written when he was 21 years old, recounting his romance with Gloria Graham when she was married to.
Oh, she's married
to
Nick Ray. She's married to his dad, and
he comes to visit them in Malibu when he's, I think, 13 years old, and Nick is a very absentee, wayward, bad father, and he leaves him with Gloria, who's a very, very desperate, lonely, peculiar person with a very sketchy morality, and they fall into a romance together. And then Nick and Gloria get divorced. Tony moves back to New York, where he had been with his mother, and then at age 21. He writes the memoir of what happened to him between him and Gloria. And that's what I've been reading.
This is unpublished?
No, it's coming out, I think, next year from Sticking Place Books from Paul Cronin.
Oh, brilliant.
And Paul asked me, first of all, I tried to get the book published in America by helping Tony Ray's daughter by his, I think, third marriage. I'm not sure, second, third marriage, but the final marriage where he kicked drugs and alcohol, which he's understandably is in his life from his family and this lineage, and retires to Maine. And she had this book, My Father's Life Story with Gloria Graham, written when he was 21, recounting his boyhood, let's call it affair, liaison with Gloria Graham. So yeah, I've been reading something interesting.
Wow, fantastic.
It's very, very interesting. I always think, now, since we're talking about Woody and what's true and what's not and what's factual and what's not, and, Woody's own autobiography, I did not love. I didn't think it was very good, and that it wasn't his forte, nonfiction.
I didn't even think it was funny, to tell you the truth. I mean,
it wasn't funny. It wasn't well edited. It wasn't well written. It becomes a rant. I don't like it. I don't think it's very good. But I always say about someone's autobiography or their memoir that it's their first constitutional right to lie all they want and write as bad a book as they care to. This is actually a really good book. What is factual about it, I'm not sure. What is truthful about it, I'm pretty sure. That it's a truthful first-person reflection on this, you'd have to say sordid, but not really, but this twisted Hollywood lost chapter in the life story of Nick Ray and Gloria Graham, which really, really contains beautiful writerly portraits of both, and brings you into their household at the point in time at which it's exploding. So would that we had Dylan Farrow's version of that in the Woody saga, which, because she was 7, she would have had to write when she was about 21 for us in order to feel that it was a truthful reminiscence, in my opinion, or at least relatively truthful. So Tony Ray, somewhat in shock over everything that had happened to him, went back to New York, and at age 21, so he's maybe 7-8 years removed from events, he writes it down with dialogue and scenes and everything that happens. And he's a pretty good writer. He later on becomes Paul Mazursky's producer and has a long, fruitful partnership with Mazursky. So that's what I've been reading. It's a good book, not for everybody, but it's a good book.
I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait for Paul's edition of it to come out. Well, listen, Pat, that's been a wonderful conversation. I think we've really gone there. I don't think we've shied away from any of the topics, as indeed.
I hope not.
As indeed your book doesn't.
Good. Well, I try to be fair to everybody's feelings and thoughts, and I know that the name Woody Allen clears the room, sadly. I always said this about my Clint Eastwood book. People who it's not, you could call it the anti-Clint book. It would be kind of a funny title, and But I have many Clint Eastwood fans who have come to me and said, well, I can tell you really don't love him as much as I do, but I learned a lot.
Well, that's important.
So like I said, I'm not professing to love or like Woody or his films, but some I do think are really good films, and I'm not moralistic about it, and you would learn a lot.
Exactly, and I totally recommend it. A Travesty of a Mockery of a Sham, Woody Allen, by Patrick McGilligan.
That's his line from Bananas in the courtroom defending himself.
I know, it's so good. I love that. It's the early funny ones.
Yeah, the really funny ones. Yeah. Anyway, John, good to see you. Good to see you. We do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Take care, Patrick.
In Italy someday we must do it.